The day I was diagnosed with cancer, my 5-year-old son asked Lucas, "Will mommy die?" Lucas hesitated for a few seconds. Then, my son suddenly brightened up. "Great! When mommy dies, Amelia can be my mommy." Lucas patted his head and said, "But we have money. If mommy gets surgery, she won't die." My son grabbed his hand and said, "Then let's spend all the money on Amelia's cakes, so mommy won't have money to get better and she'll die, right?" After thinking for a long time, Lucas replied, "Right." That day, Lucas took our son to the cake shop and topped up $500,000. By the time they got home, I was already gone. On the table was the divorce agreement I had left behind, with a sentence written on the back. I contacted a hospital in Heischer and flew there that night. While I was registering for admission, my phone rang. I didn't expect the first call after leaving home to be from Amelia. Hearing her timid voice, I knew Lucas and Matthew were probably beside her. "Sophia, I'm sorry," she started, then burst into tears. "Please don't be mad. I'll return the $500,000 to Lucas right now and you can use it for your treatment, okay?" In the background, Matthew was comforting Amelia. "Mommy made sister cry. Mommy is bad. Matthew will hit mommy." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "Miss Amelia, I thought you'd be calling to let me congratulate you and Lucas on finally getting together, but I didn't expect you'd call to return the money. I'm not so poor that I can't even afford my treatment. Goodbye." Amelia's voice faltered. "Sophia, I know you're upset because of your illness, but there's no need to make me sound like a homewrecker." I smiled. "You're right. You're not even worthy of being called that." I hung up, imagining how furious she must have been. The next second, Lucas called. "Sophia, it's just $500,000. What are you making such a fuss about? Amelia was being kind, and you insulted her without thinking. Where's your decency?" I didn't feel like arguing. "If you're so decent, Lucas, then hurry up and sign the divorce papers." Lucas hesitated for a moment. "You heard everything Matthew said, didn't you? He's only 5. I was just trying to make him happy. Why take it so seriously?" "But would my death only make Matthew happy?" I said nothing and blocked him. That night, I slept deeply. It was unexpected. Before, even a minor cold would make me so anxious I couldn't eat or sleep. I was afraid of infecting my son, and I worried I wouldn't be able to cook delicious meals for Lucas. Whenever Lucas saw me taking medicine, he would laugh and call me overly cautious. But now, with cancer, I slept more peacefully than ever. The next day, I started undergoing tests as the doctor ordered. Blood tests, MRIs, Peru time/Central Time scans. Once all the tests were done, I went to the doctor's office to ask about the treatment plan. I overheard a young intern sending a voice message to her boyfriend. "I'm almost out of pads. Don't forget to buy me some." I froze for a moment, my mind drifting away. The first time I heard the name Amelia was also because of sanitary pads. A year ago, Lucas had attended a banquet. He said it would end at 10, but he didn't come home until after midnight. He came back drenched from the rain, and while he was in the shower, a WeChat message popped up on his charging phone. That's how I saw the conversation with someone named Amelia. "Has my CEO arrived home safely?" I scrolled up. At 9:50 p.m., Amelia had sent Lucas a shaky voice message asking for help. "Lucas, I need sanitary pads, but it's raining, and my cramps are so bad I can't walk. Can you help me?" A few minutes later, Lucas replied, "Wait for me." My fingers felt cold as I opened Amelia's moments. Her latest post was a mix of amusement and frustration, showing a room full of sanitary pads. The clueless CEO didn't know what to buy, so he emptied the store. Her location? A district away from our home. It turned out Lucas was late not because of the banquet but because he had braved the rain to deliver sanitary pads to his assistant across town. The comments on her post were all over the place. Someone said, "Enough to last you until menopause, huh?" Another asked, "When will your CEO start replacing pads with luxury bags?" The next second, my phone buzzed again. Amelia had sent me a screenshot, highlighting the comment about bags. "My dear CEO, aren't they mean? I'm just a little assistant. How could I ever hope to receive a bag from you? I was 15 when I met Lucas, who was 2 years older than me, through our parents. Over the years, women had flocked around him. But I had to admit, only Amelia made me uncomfortable. I raised my hand and typed one word. Yes. Lucas came out of the bathroom and quickly noticed something was off. He looked at his phone and didn't blame me for invading his privacy or for replying on his behalf. Instead, he explained, "It's my new assistant. I need her to accompany me to an important meeting tomorrow, and I'm worried she'll get sick if she goes out in the rain to buy things, so I'm just doing her a small favor." I smiled. Doesn't she know there are delivery apps? For something as personal as sanitary pads, you had to brave the rain and cross districts to deliver them? Lucas showed signs of impatience. Not everyone knows how to use those apps. She's a fresh grad, really naive. You don't need to be so suspicious of her. I had been married to Lucas for 6 years. He had always respected me, and this was the first time he had undermined me for another woman. I suddenly felt very tired and went straight to the bedroom to lie down. Just an hour before Amelia asked Lucas for help, she had ordered a box of condoms through the delivery app and sent Lucas a screenshot. Lucas didn't reply. Maybe he was busy or unsure how to respond to her. I didn't distrust Lucas. I knew that even if Amelia hadn't suddenly gotten her period that night, Lucas wouldn't be the one using those condoms. Still, they made me feel disgusted. Even more disgusting was receiving a screenshot from Lucas's other assistant the next day. It was Amelia's Moments. She was holding a new Chanel handbag in one hand while taking a selfie with the other. "You all wanted the bag, and my CEO got it for me. The doctor told me that based on the current test results, the situation looked optimistic, and the surgery wasn't complicated. I've scheduled your surgery for 5 days from now. It requires general anesthesia, and a family member needs to sign and accompany you." I thanked the doctor but felt troubled. I hadn't told my parents about my illness and didn't want to see Lucas. After thinking for a long time, I sent a WeChat message to my friend. Emily called me right away. "You're having surgery? What about Lucas?" I didn't tell him. "We're getting divorced." Because of Amelia? Emily knew about the shadow Amelia cast over my relationship with Lucas. It was because, in my most helpless moments, I had cried to her without reservation. Not long after Lucas bought Amelia the bag, there was one night when Amelia helped drunken Lucas home. Lucas had drunk quite a bit, and Amelia was tightly clutching him, their bodies pressed close together. And on her left arm, she had that Chanel bag. She wanted to help Lucas into the room, but I refused. I managed to help Lucas back to the bedroom alone. When I came out to get water, I found Amelia still standing at the door, not leaving. I went over to close the door. She looked at me with a smug expression. "Sophia, you're not as pretty as I imagined." She didn't even address me as Mrs. Lucas. I smirked. "Is that so? But you're definitely more shameless than I imagined." I didn't want her to see me in a state of fury. I forced myself to maintain my last shred of dignity and smiled as I gently shut the door in her face. As soon as I turned around, the tears started to flow. The next day, I told Lucas about the incident and mentioned the bag. He didn't see anything wrong. "She drank last night, and her words were impolite. You should understand. Nowadays, young girls can be a bit vain. Spending tens of thousands on a bag can suit them, why bother with her?" I stood my ground. "You have plenty of young girls around you. Have you ever seen me act that way with anyone?" Seeing that I was genuinely upset, Lucas said nothing more. That night, he told me he had fired Amelia. I thought that maybe he still valued me after all. But soon, I discovered Lucas had opened a dessert shop for Amelia. And that shop was right across from my son's kindergarten. That day, I sat in the car, watching Lucas take our son for dessert, while Amelia came out to greet them, smiling and saying goodbye to Lucas and that she would see Matthew tomorrow. I couldn't control myself any longer and cried as I called Emily. From that day on, Matthew began to distance himself from me and insisted that his dad take him to and from school. Since then, I felt weary of this marriage and of the father-son duo. Emily flew in to be with me that day. We went to the night market and chatted like we did in college. It was then that I realized. Since marrying Lucas and having Matthew, I had lost so much. They say the world is balanced. If you lose something, something else will fill the void. But upon reflection, I hadn't received any consolation that was worth my while. Just then, Lucas called me from a new number. Matthew has a fever. My hand paused on the corn I was eating. After a moment, I replied, I have nothing to do with you two anymore. Since the day I left the divorce agreement, you need to learn to take care of Matthew by yourself. If he has a fever, take him to the hospital. Calling me won't solve the problem. But I can't handle him. Matthew had always been weak, and he had been sick countless times. To avoid disrupting Lucas's work, I had always taken care of him alone and never bothered Lucas. I knew that whenever Matthew was sick, he wouldn't eat or drink and would cry day and night. Even though he was already 5, he hadn't settled down much. What about his favorite Aunt Amelia? Can't she handle him? Lucas's tone was weary. Sophia, can you please stop being sarcastic? Nothing happened between Amelia and me. Where are you? I'll come pick you up. Emily was stunned, murmuring softly, you have cancer, of course, you should be seeking medical help at a time like this. How can he still ask where you are and want you to go back to take care of the kids? I forced a smile and replied to Lucas, still the same, we have nothing to do with each other. You figure it out. Lucas's tone suddenly darkened. Sophia, when did you become so petty? Fine, even if you don't love me anymore and want a divorce, you can't just abandon our son, right? I didn't want him to affect my mood any longer. Yeah, I don't want either of you. I blocked his new number, thinking I had made everything clear, and that my world would be peaceful from then on. But on the day of the surgery, the nanny suddenly called me. Ma'am, the little master is crying and asking for you. A pang of sadness shot through my heart. Thinking he must be feeling very lonely and sad without me by his side, especially since he had been running a fever, I asked the nanny to let Matthew speak to me. On the other end of the line, Matthew's sobs came through clearly. Then he shouted, Sophia, you bad woman. You do nothing at home, and now you want to divorce and take so much money from my dad. What right do you have? My heart felt like it had dropped to the bottom. My teeth chattered, because your dad and I are married, and because I gave birth to you for the Lucas family. Matthew cried, gasping for air, I don't care that you gave birth to me. Aunt Amelia said that if she had met my dad earlier, she would have given birth to me. At that moment, the flustered nanny snatched the phone back. I'm sorry, ma'am. I thought the little master was crying for you because he missed you. Matthew screamed and cursed at the nanny, probably hitting and kicking her too. I responded, it's fine, just hang up. I didn't know where Matthew had hit the nanny, but she gasped in pain and still asked me, Ma'am, I heard you were ill. How are you feeling? I finally felt a little warmth and replied softly, I'm fine, doing well. This was the first care I had received since leaving the Lucas family, coming from one of their nannies. The results of the surgery turned out surprisingly well. It was just a localized cancer, and removing it meant I was cured. I didn't even need radiation or chemotherapy. Emily hugged me, both crying and laughing. Sophia, finally, the heavens haven't let you down this time. Yes, fate seemed to be particularly kind to me at that moment. Because I also received a call from my lawyer. Lucas had finally signed the divorce agreement. He also asked the lawyer to pass on a message. Mr. Lucas hopes that the news of your divorce will not be made public for the time being. Since we were married, I decided to help him with this request. After all, I needed to gradually work on my side of the family too. The surgery was minimally invasive, and after spending 7 days in the hospital, I bid farewell to Emily and returned to the countryside of Usher. There was a house there, left to me after my grandmother passed away. The yard was overgrown with weeds. It suddenly occurred to me that since Matthew had taken a liking to Aunt Amelia, he had refused to come back to the small courtyard for weekends. And I didn't want to come alone and experience loneliness. It had been over half a year since I last visited the small courtyard. I paid some nearby farmers to help tidy up the place. The slow life in the countryside was truly rejuvenating. There were freshly picked vegetables from the farmers' fields, warm eggs from free-range hens, and freshly made soy milk and tofu. Life was peaceful and pleasant. Until one rainy evening, I saw a business car parked at my doorstep. Lucas and Matthew got out of the car. Matthew shouted "Mommy!" and ran toward me, ignoring the splashes of rain that soaked his pants as he threw himself into my arms. I had just bought 2 carp and a block of tofu from the riverside, which fell to the ground when Matthew crashed into me. The carp flopped around wildly on the ground. I quickly pushed Matthew away and squatted down, heartbroken, to scoop the fish back into the basin. I sighed as I looked at the ruined tofu. What a shame. Matthew looked at me in shock and then pouted. Mom, I'm here, and you didn't even look at me. Instead, you're worried about 2 fish and a piece of tofu? I shot him a glance. This is my dinner. What's wrong with feeling sorry for it? I noticed that Matthew had lost quite a bit of weight. Back in the Lucas family, the nanny was only responsible for cleaning, while I cooked all 3 meals myself. I realized that during the time I had been gone, Matthew hadn't had a single decent meal. Matthew's little face was full of grievance. Lucas stepped forward. Matthew, let's go buy another piece of tofu so Mommy can cook for you and Daddy, okay? No. I spoke before Matthew could respond. Lucas, we're divorced now. Is it appropriate for you and your son to come here to beg for food from your ex-wife? Lucas looked a bit awkward. It's just a meal, is it really that serious? But I don't want to. I wouldn't even want to serve them a glass of water, let alone cook a meal. I spoke to him earnestly. Lucas, please, don't disturb my life anymore. At that moment, the previously quiet Matthew suddenly reached out and knocked the carp out of my hand again. Bad woman. You did it on purpose. Aunt Amelia said that to win a man's heart, you have to win his stomach. You know this, so you cook for us every day to make sure Dad and I can't live without you. I stared at the arrogant child in front of me, raising my hand. Matthew brought his face closer. Bad woman, you want to hit me? Go ahead. Daddy, look. Bad mommy is going to hit Matthew. In that instant, I lost the desire to hit him. I squatted down and went back to picking up my fish. Matthew, just go away. I won't hit you. You're not my son anymore, you don't deserve my discipline. Your Aunt Amelia is right, to win a man's heart, you have to win his stomach. So, she's been trying hard to learn to make desserts, right? So why didn't she manage to keep you and Daddy? My son glared at me with hatred. Dessert can't be a meal. I laughed. Exactly, dessert can't be a meal. Matthew was still young and didn't catch my implication, but Lucas understood. His expression darkened. Yet he lowered himself again and asked me once more. Matthew hasn't eaten your cooking in a long time. Could you please make him a meal? Perhaps afraid I would refuse, he surprisingly expressed concern for me. Sophia, when are you going to have surgery? Don't be scared, Matthew and I will be with you. Lucas, I've already had the surgery. Lucas was taken aback. You had the surgery? What was the result? When do you start chemotherapy? I waved my hand at him. You don't need to know any of that. Lucas's expression darkened. I'm sorry, Sophia. I didn't know you had already had the surgery. Why didn't you tell me? I turned away. We're done. You don't need to apologize for that. Also, let me reiterate it and disturb me again, or I'll be forced to change places, and you'll never find me. Lucas left with Matthew. Matthew wore a sulky face, angry for not having had a meal of his mom's carp stew. Watching the car drive away, I cheerfully went to buy another block of tofu. When the carp soup was ready, I sprinkled it with finely chopped green onions and cilantro. I took a deep breath and enjoyed 2 bowls. There's nothing more soothing than hot soup after the rain. After that, Lucas and Matthew didn't bother me for many days. Before I knew it, it was the autumn harvest season. One day, I sat under the grape arbor, flipping through some recently taken photos. A taxi stopped at the gate. The housekeeper hurriedly got out of the car with Matthew. The moment she saw me, she sighed in relief. Ma'am, you're okay? That's great. Matthew once again leaped into my arms. Great. Mommy, you didn't die. I still have a mommy. I was confused. The housekeeper wiped her tears and explained the situation to me. Yesterday was Amelia's birthday, and Lucas had promised to surprise her. Amelia was convinced that Lucas was going to propose to her. On their way to the hotel, Lucas received a call from the teacher saying that Matthew had gotten into a conflict with another child and knocked out a tooth. They rushed to the kindergarten. Probably wanting to resolve the matter quickly and get to the hotel, Amelia told Matthew to apologize as soon as she saw him. Matthew insisted he hadn't done anything wrong. He provoked me first, and he kicked me several times. Amelia's expression soured immediately. Matthew, why are you lying? Apologize right now. But Matthew stubbornly refused. I didn't do anything wrong or lie. Why should I apologize? Later, with Lucas's insistence, the teacher reviewed the surveillance footage. It turned out the other child had provoked Matthew first. That little rascal loudly told Matthew, "The lady at the dessert shop by the school is a bad woman, she's your dad's mistress and the other woman." It was clear that Lucas took his son to the dessert shop every day, and since I hadn't picked up Matthew in a while, some parents began to gossip. As a result, Matthew got into a fight with that child. Aunt Amelia is the best woman. My mom doesn't want me and dad anymore, so Aunt Amelia isn't the other woman. That kid then kicked Matthew a few times, and when Matthew pushed him, he fell and knocked out a tooth. Once the truth was revealed, Lucas took Matthew home and didn't invite Amelia to the hotel. Amelia felt that Matthew had ruined her proposal. Today, when Lucas left Matthew at the store for her to take care of, she couldn't help herself and slapped Matthew. She scolded him for being more trouble than he was worth. Matthew cried out and instinctively called for his mom. Amelia tightly pinched his mouth. Shut up. Your mom has cancer and will die soon. You have no mom, and don't ever mention her in front of me again. Matthew warned her, you're a bad person. I'm going to tell Dad. Amelia didn't care. Your dad loves me. It won't matter if you tell him. You can't tell Dad. If you don't listen to me, I'll make your dad kill you. Matthew was terrified. He had no choice but to find the housekeeper and ask her to take him to the countryside to see if his mom was really dead. I listened silently, handing the housekeeper a bunch of grapes to eat, but I didn't comfort Matthew, who had long been pushed away and was still crying. After the housekeeper finished the grapes, I changed my clothes. Let's go. The housekeeper looked at me, puzzled. Ma'am, where are you going? To find that Miss Amelia. Matthew happily jumped into the car. Mommy, are you going to get revenge for me? I didn't reply. He grabbed my hand and tried to pull me to the back seat, but I gently pushed him away and sat in the passenger seat. Matthew was clearly excited. He chattered away the whole way, pulling the conversation back to me. This was a side of him I had never seen before. My son, I had only been away from him for 2 months, and he had already learned to butter me up. It was evident he missed me, not just for my cooking but also because of Amelia's slap. He realized that after I left, he was now in a tough situation and felt very insecure. When the car arrived at the dessert shop, Lucas was also there. I pushed the door open and, without a word, slapped Amelia twice. Amelia was hit so hard that blood came from the corner of her mouth. She covered her face, tears streaming from the pain, but tried hard to maintain a low profile. Sophia, go ahead and hit me. I know you've wanted to hit me because I love Lucas. You're wrong. I rubbed my sore palm. These 2 slaps have nothing to do with Lucas. The first slap is for cursing me, wishing I were dead. The second slap is for laying a hand on my son. I looked at Matthew and said, he's my son. Even if I'm no longer a daughter-in-law of the Lucas family, disciplining him should be left to his father and grandparents. You have no right to touch him. Amelia bit her lip, feeling wronged. Matthew is misbehaving, and I'm just trying to discipline him for his own good. She turned to Lucas with tearful eyes for help. But Lucas avoided her gaze and instead asked me, you just had surgery, using that much strength, are you okay? I didn't feel like answering him. At that moment, Matthew suddenly clapped his hands. Wow, mommy is so cool. Mommy hit the bad woman for me because she loves me. I slowly crouched down and touched Matthew's little face. Did it hurt when she hit you? It hurt. Matthew's face crinkled as he recalled the situation, and he started to cry. I sighed and took out a wet wipe to clean my hands. Did you know that when mommy heard you wanted her to die, it hurt a lot more than that slap she gave you? The day I was diagnosed, I called Lucas right away. But then I thought of Matthew. I suddenly wanted to pick him up from school and take him to Amelia's dessert shop to order all his favorite treats. In the past, I had opposed him eating sweets. But at that moment, I wanted him to know that mommy loved him. I didn't know how long I would live, and in the face of life and death, even the little grievances I held against Amelia and Lucas faded significantly. But when I arrived at the school, Lucas had already picked up Matthew before I could get there. I followed behind them and overheard Lucas telling his son, Matthew, your mommy is very sick. Then I heard the chilling conversation between them. Later, Lucas took Matthew to the dessert shop, and when Amelia came out to send them off, she was so surprised that she covered her face and cried, throwing herself into Lucas's arms. Lucas, you really topped up my account with 500,000. Lucas gently patted her back. Matthew joyfully ran around them. Oh, I have 500,000 worth of desserts to eat. Mommy will die because she doesn't have money for treatment, and then Aunt Amelia can be my mommy. I'm so happy. In that moment, my heart felt dead. Matthew looked down and apologized to me. Mommy, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said those hurtful things. I thought Aunt Amelia was younger and kinder than you. She even opened her own dessert shop and said she made more money than you, and all you do is spend my dad's money. I smiled slightly. Do you know that Aunt Amelia's dessert shop was funded by your dad? Without the 500,000 you just mentioned, the shop wouldn't even be able to pay its employees? Matthew stared blankly. Aunt Amelia's image collapsed once more. After finishing my business, I turned to leave. But Matthew tightly grabbed my clothes. Mommy, where are you going? Aren't you going home with Matthew? I turned back. I've already divorced your dad. I won't be going back to that home. Don't think that what happened today was me getting revenge for you. This is between Mommy and Aunt Amelia and has nothing to do with you. So don't think that me hitting her means I want to reconcile with you and your dad. Do you understand? I returned to the little courtyard in the countryside. I started picking grapes to make wine and documented the process to upload on social media. I spent the entire autumn earnestly recording the harvest scenes. I went with the old woman from the West House to pick the small potatoes that others had discarded, mixing them with sweet potato vines and dried chili peppers to make pickles. I also went with the sister from the East Village to pick mountain pears to make fruit preserves, going barefoot in the fields to catch field frogs. I felt fulfilled every day and hardly thought about Lucas and Matthew. I even planned to catch some chicks to raise next spring, digging for worms and catching loaches to feed them, so I could eat their eggs and have meat in the winter. I shared these plans with my live streaming fans, who eagerly supported me, encouraging me to raise more so they could taste the most authentic free-range eggs. Every time I streamed, Lucas would come in and gift me virtual items, sometimes worth tens of thousands. Later, I simply turned off the live streaming gifts and focused on making food videos. To my surprise, I hadn't intended to shine, but by the end of the harvest season, my followers had exceeded 300,000. With a little fame came many product endorsement invitations, but I turned them all down. My original intention was not to pursue that. On the other hand, the result of becoming famous was that both Lucas's family and my parents noticed I was not focused on my duties. First, my parents called to ask why I wasn't content being a good wife and mother and was instead doing these frivolous things. Then one evening, Lucas's mother called me. Don't just focus on making videos. Next week is your father-in-law's birthday, remember to come back for dinner. After hanging up the phone, I sighed, feeling troubled. Lucas barged in with Matthew, bringing me some warm clothing. I frowned and said, it's not like I don't have money. I can buy these again. From now on, don't bring me anything. Just have the housekeeper deal with my things at home. When I divorced Lucas, I wasn't foolish enough to give up my assets. Since the Lucas family business is a family enterprise and sorting out the assets belonging to just Lucas and me would be complicated, I settled for $20 million. When Lucas signed the divorce agreement, he added another $10 million on top of that. So, I was quite financially secure. At this moment, Matthew, wrapped in a thick coat, approached me, hesitating to say something. I noticed he had lost a lot of weight. "What do you want to say?" He bit his lip and said, "Mommy, are you really sick? Aunt Amelia said that if you have cancer, you will die. Why haven't you died?" Lucas scolded his son sharply. "Matthew, what are you talking about?" Matthew tilted his head back, displeased. "Mommy is lying to us." He pouted at me. "Mommy, you're not really sick, are you? You tricked me and Daddy back then, making us say the wrong things on purpose, and then you used that as an excuse to abandon us. You actually never wanted Daddy and me, right?" At that moment, no matter what this child said, I couldn't get angry. I slowly chewed on some dried apples. "Did Aunt Amelia tell you this again?" Matthew remained silent with a serious face. It seemed I was right. I couldn't help but admire Amelia. Even after she had seduced Matthew, and Lucas knew about it, she could still maintain contact with both of them. She could still sow discord between us. Lucas, sensing my thoughts, hurriedly explained, "You know, Matthew is used to having desserts every day." I replied, "I know. After all, with the 500,000 you recharged, it wouldn't be possible to spend it all that quickly." Lucas looked awkward. I pointed outside, "The things have been delivered, you can leave now. In the future, don't come up with any excuses to find me. By the way, I won't be attending your father's birthday next week. You should let your family know about our divorce soon. Acting in this charade for you two is exhausting." Lucas's face showed defeat. It seemed he didn't expect my attitude to still be so terrible. He looked out the window and said, "It's too late. Why don't we stay overnight and leave tomorrow morning?" His phone suddenly rang. Amelia's crying voice came through. "Lucas, my dad has passed away. Can you come keep me company?" Lucas almost without hesitation replied, "Okay." After hanging up, he recalled that he had just asked to stay overnight at my place. "Sophia, Amelia only has one dad." I laughed. Who doesn't have just one dad? He felt embarrassed by his incoherent speech, his face turning red. I opened the door. "Please go ahead." Lucas still wanted to say something to cover up, but I raised my eyelids and said, "Get lost." Lucas took his son and left for the funeral home. Just a week later, he appeared there again because his father had passed away from a heart attack after being enraged by Amelia on his birthday. According to the housekeeper from the Lucas family who spilled the beans to me, on the day of the old man's birthday, Amelia barged into the family home to demand a marriage proposal. She told the Lucas family, "Sophia and Lucas have already divorced." The Lucas family parents didn't believe her. So, Amelia showed them a stack of photos. The photos were taken at her father's funeral. During the memorial, Lucas was standing next to Amelia. Anyone who saw this would think Lucas was Amelia's lover. The old man was so furious that he had a heart attack on the spot and died before the ambulance arrived. The Lucas family had always treated me well, so out of courtesy and logic, I had to attend the old man's funeral. Lucas looked much haggard. When he saw me, he was still explaining, "Sophia, Amelia said her family has no power or influence and wants to give her father a grand funeral, asking me to pretend to be a son-in-law. So that now you've become a real son-in-law." I waved my hand. "You really don't need to explain so much to me. We're no longer married." Lucas eagerly grabbed my hand. "Wife, I was indeed confused before. I didn't expect her to be so vicious. I realize my mistakes now. Please come back, okay?" He then pulled Matthew, who was crying, toward me. "Matthew, apologize to Mommy." Matthew's nose was running. "Mommy, I'm sorry. Please come home, Mommy. I love you." I handed him a tissue. "But I don't love you anymore." The next time I saw Matthew was 4 years later. He was already in the 3rd grade. With his teacher, he came to visit my organic food processing factory. After Lucas's grandfather's funeral 4 years ago, I moved away from my grandmother's little courtyard to seek peace and quiet. But I couldn't forget those pleasant months, the sweetness of the radishes, potatoes, and cabbages grown without fertilizers, or the delicious taste of the chickens, ducks, geese, and pigs raised at home. I also couldn't forget the helplessness and hardship of the villagers who worked all year round but earned so little for their crops. So, I established the organic food processing factory. I started shooting videos and live streaming on social media to promote the crops from my hometown. Over 4 years, my factory's area expanded dozens of times. I became the spokesperson for the province and a national model worker. In these years, although I hadn't seen Lucas or Matthew, the housekeeper would occasionally update me on the Lucas family's news. Shortly after the old man's death, Lucas's mother also had a stroke. Lucas managed the company alone, overwhelmed with work. Amelia was unhappy that Lucas distanced himself from her and colluded with Lucas's business rivals, making several attacks on the Lucas family. Once a thriving Lucas family gradually declined, and its current market value is now less than half of my company's. Lucas was in a bad mood and sometimes drank, venting his frustrations on Matthew. He had lost his dignity and upbringing, scolding his own son as a harbinger of death. If it weren't for you insisting on Aunt Amelia being your mom wouldn't have abandoned us. If it weren't for you questioning whether your mom was really sick that day, your mom wouldn't have missed your grandpa's birthday banquet, and your grandpa wouldn't have died. At first, Matthew was too young to understand how to argue back. Later, he started to resist. If it weren't for you bringing me to see Aunt Amelia, how would I have had the chance to compare her to my mom? When I said I wanted to use all my mom's medical expenses and let her die, you went and stored $500,000 for Aunt Amelia. I was only 5 years old then. How old were you? Would my mom be angry with a little kid, or would she be angry with an adult? After Aunt Amelia slapped me, I hated her, but you made her apologize and buy me toys. That's how I accepted her again, only to be instigated by her to question my mom for pretending to be sick and abandoning us. When Matthew came to visit, I happened to walk past a group of kids. He stood under my giant promotional photo, his eyes glistening with tears. The teacher asked Matthew what was wrong. He touched the photo and said, "This is my mom." His classmates didn't believe him, saying, "Matthew is just bragging. How could your mom be that amazing? Matthew is mistaking his mom, ha ha ha." Matthew's face turned bright red in frustration. He was eager to defend himself when he turned around and saw me standing not far away. "Great. My mom is right there. I'll have her tell you if I'm her son." He happily ran toward me. The scene before me overlapped with that day. It was also this child, happily telling his father, "Great. Now that mommy is dead, I can have Aunt Amelia as my mom." I gently stopped the young boy in front of me. "Classmate, you've mistaken me for someone else. I'm not your mom." Matthew was about to cry from anxiety. "Mommy, I was wrong. Dad and I both know we were wrong. Please come home." When you're not at home, no one in the family laughs. "Mommy, I won't call anyone else my mom again. Dad won't flirt with other aunts anymore. I'm begging you, Mommy, come back." I smiled and called the teacher over. The teacher took Matthew away, continuously apologizing to me. A little girl came over to comfort me. "Auntie, it must be because you're so amazing that Matthew wants to call you his mom. If I had a mom like you, I would be so proud that I would smile in my sleep." I patted the little girl on the shoulder. "Then do you love your mom?" "Of course. Although my mom isn't as pretty or as successful as you, she's just an ordinary cleaner, and she speaks quite loudly, but she hugs me when I'm sick and cooks for me every day. I'm proud of her too and laugh in my sleep dreaming about her." As Matthew listened, he gradually stopped struggling to get closer to me. The little girl lifted her innocent face and asked, "Auntie, do you have kids?" I smiled and replied, "I used to have one, but 4 years ago, he lost me." Matthew was already in tears. He looked at me and said, "Mommy." But this time, he didn't shout it out loud.